Okay, let's first start with this whole, I guess, your understanding of what happened, or what was going on with naturalization and these ceremonies that were supposed to be conducted and then weren't and then are back on. What was your understanding of that, and what part of the process I mean, obviously that's the end of the process. Can you speak to what leads up to that, and why that's such an important part of the work that you do and the people that you work with?
Naturalization ceremonies are kind of the graduation in terms of immigration, right? It's the big party at the end where you get to celebrate the fact that you have had gone through all of the processes that you need to go through and you have permanency in the United States. Citizenship, once you have citizenship, it is very hard to denaturalize somebody. And so like once you attain citizenship, you have a lot of protection and your life is a lot more secure. Even for people who have green cards, which is the step before citizenship, um, it's still not quite as secure. There's ways that if you commit certain crimes or a few other things happen, you can have your green card taken away. But once you get citizenship, you really have a very secure place. And so it's citizenship naturalization ceremonies are really they're really happy events. They are something that I really love. I love interacting with people who sometimes I will go into the USCIS office and there will be people who are coming out who have recently naturalized. And it's just a really wonderful to see people have experienced that kind of welcoming and security of what they finally have in the United States. Um, with regard to naturalization, it's often the ceremonies will occur at various places. There is under the statute jurisdictional questions or jurisdictional issues around uh, the district courts, and generally they have jurisdiction um, over the citizenship ceremonies. But USCIS had canceled a bunch of the ceremonies upstate, but has since rescinded that. So I think that I think that it has hopefully blown over for now. And I think that the questions around citizenship currently are at there are questions about how secure citizenship is for people in some situations with the attempt to revoke birthright citizenship and overturn 150 years worth of precedent. And so I think that citizenship is both more a coveted thing now and also less secure than it used to be.
Why would they cancel a ceremony?
Um, that is a good question, and you will have to ask USCIS.
Okay. You mentioned citizenship being so valuable. We've talked before about the the path to that. And I think that we saw, like you said, the cancellation in this and being sort of the final step, right? That's what this was. There was also function behind the celebration, if I'm understanding that right. Like you needed to do this. It wasn't just, hey, like you already, it's not like a graduation where you celebrate after getting your diploma. You're gonna get that anyway. You need to do this, right, to complete your citizenship. Okay.
Yeah. There's the citizenship interview, which is the application. You go through the citizenship test, the English test, and you make sure that you meet all the requirements. And then you will get scheduled subsequently for a citizenship ceremony, which is kind of the citizenship ceremony. It's kind of the official kind of swearing in, if you will, of citizens.
Yeah, it's one of the more cool events, or you could say that I've been to, in this business of covering, because you get this, like, obviously we love stories, so like you get stories from that by just talking to people about why they're there, their motivations, and they're special. And like we said before, that it takes time to be able to get there. as we've spoken before, like you said, the barriers or the just to be able to actually get through this process has become more difficult. Is that still the way it is now? What's changed when it comes to some of these mechanisms for people to get to that final point, the way you see it here in November of 25?
So generally there, I'm going to kind of explain in a law professory way. But generally, there are kind of two types of immigration visas. You have non-immigrant visas, so like work or student visas, and then you have immigrant visas, which are maybe based on family relationship. That's the primary way that people get a green card or a visa. And there are also humanitarian ways to get one, and some through work. And so you first need a visa. And the immigrant versus non-immigrant distinction is you need an immigrant visa in order to get a green card. So that's get a visa, you get a green card then. And then after 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. So you have to have a green card for 5 years. And then after that, you can apply for citizenship. And so even if everything goes very smoothly, it's a long process. It's more difficult at every stage now to get first that visa, then to get a green card, and then the naturalization test is a barrier as well. And the way that USCIS has been adjudicating some of the questions around good moral character and a few other issues has given them more discretion. So it is a little bit more unpredictable about how they will rule.
Because can we is there is it can we differentiate the individual these videos and what you're seeing on the streets, these raids of people? Are they, I guess from what you understand, is it a kind of across the spectrum of individuals that are working towards this, or is ICE targeting specific people that aren't in this process? You know what I mean? Because I think we've talked before about the barriers they face now with even having an attorney, having representation to defend themselves. Where do these things cross over, and do they, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because it illustrates just how complicated immigration law is. So there are two ways, mostly two ways that you can acquire status in the United States. One is through USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and that's when you are not in immigration court, you are not actively being prosecuted to be deported from the country.
Right.
And so that is one way to proceed, where if you're already in the United States and if you are able to stay in the United States and retain status, you are often able to proceed in an affirmative manner where you're not detained, you're not in immigration court proceedings, and you have more liberty. In the alternative, a different way is in an immigration court proceeding. So for people who enter the United States at the southern border, who request asylum, or who are found to be identified and charged with being either removable, deportable, or inadmissible to the United States, but in some way removable from the United States, and then they're put in immigration court proceedings. Generally, ICE has authority only to arrest and detain certain individuals, and that's people generally who are in violation of immigration laws. So people who are present without any sort of status. What is happening as far, I think, in terms of the ICE raids that we've been seeing, is indiscriminate. It doesn't seem like ICE is particularly targeting or particularly worried about capturing only people who have no immigration status. I know I've heard reports of US citizens getting swept up in those, people with green cards, people with status. And ICE is more broadly attempting to and claiming authority to arrest and detain a broader range of people. So not just people who are in the United States without status, but who even if they are in proceedings or in a process to acquire status, or even have been granted some statuses, they are still being arrested. And so that is, I think, increasingly worrisome because it makes it less predictable who is at risk. And as an immigration attorney, it is more difficult for me to identify how to advise my clients around how to navigate that risk.
Well, could someone, I guess, be say someone's a day, and I'll keep on theme here, a day from that ceremony, and there's a raid on a factory, right? They're indiscriminate. They say they get 50 people, and they're like, well, this is what I have. My naturalization ceremony is tomorrow. Like, well, will they say, what's the process? Does it change at all how that process goes, even though they're that far along?
So ICE would that's a interesting question, and I'm not sure what the law says on the period of time between when somebody passes their immigration test and is scheduled for a citizenship ceremony or naturalization ceremony, and the naturalization ceremony. But generally, ICE only has authority if they believe that you are removable in some way, and then you can be charged with being removable. In order to do that, even if you had a green card, they need a reason to remove that. So generally when we see that happen, it's based on a conviction or an arrest, and so that's something that is often a trigger for somebody to have their to get caught up in either detention or immigration proceedings more broadly.
At, at the same time, I guess my next question would be when it comes to being detained, like, is there something that person who's really far along could do to just say, hey, like, here's the evidence that I took this test, or does that process include detainment, sending someone from Saratoga to Batavia to figure all this out after they did all that work to make sure that they were doing things the right way? And then now you hear the stories of what they had to deal with in detainment.
Um, so I'll use myself as an example. So I'm walking down the street. I am a U.S. citizen, but ICE identifies me and they think that I am present without authorization, and so they arrest me and they take me into immigration custody, which is civil custody.
Right. Say maybe
Um,
you don't have your ID on you or something, right?
yeah,
As a U.S. citizen, if you're giving me an example, right?
so exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean that's I won't get into the technicalities of that
Sorry.
because
Sorry.
I think
Okay, fair,
yeah.
fair.
But I'm in custody. What is the legal mechanism for me to get out? There are kind of two primary ways. First, the primary way is to request bond. So to request at a bond hearing that an immigration judge orders you to be removed or orders you to be released from detention. Often that will be kind of like a bail bond. So released on like a $5,000 or $10,000 bond. And that bond ensures that somebody will return to court. And they will be in the meantime released back and are able to be back in their home. There might be additional restrictions around check-ins with ICE on a recurring basis or surveillance. Ankle kind of GPS ankle monitors are an increasingly common form of tracking that are used sometimes for people who are released. But that's generally the process. The concerning thing that we've been seeing is ICE is increasingly saying that people are not entitled to that bond hearing. So if I'm in immigration custody and I want to be able to get out, what ICE is saying is that I don't have the right to even ask for a hearing so that the judge can determine whether I can be released or not. And so I, as a US citizen, um, am in that same position regardless of my citizenship, um, and in the same position as somebody without status or somebody who has a green card because I can't get to that um, part of the process. The way around that, or one of the ways that that can be addressed, is to file a habeas petition. So a habeas corpus petition is a lawsuit in federal court that basically says it's a let me out petition. It says I have been wrongfully arrested and detained by the government, and the government has to release me, or at least a federal judge has to hear whether I should be released. And so that is a increasingly frequently used tool that people are having to go to in order to even get that initial bond hearing. Because ICE's recent position has been that anybody who entered without inspection is subject to mandatory detention and therefore isn't eligible for bond. So it has created a gigantic number of people who simply aren't entitled to that first hearing.
If you don't know this, how all those things, like I guess if it's not you who knows about all of that, I think we talked about this before as being the underlying issue of representation. I mean, are you notified that that's an option, or do you just have to figure that out as you go? Because that could, if someone doesn't know that, I guess how would they be able to proceed with some of those options?
I mean, they wouldn't, right? Like, so if somebody didn't have an attorney who was problem solving and trying to figure out how to get them out, they wouldn't be able to necessarily identify how to do that. There are law libraries in ICE detention facilities, and there are resources. Some of them include habeas assistance, but they are very, very limited, and they're not that broadly accessible. So there is, I think, some knowledge for people who are in detention to provide support to each other, to help share that information. But it is difficult, and there's no real mechanism by which people who are outside of the detention facilities can can get into those facilities to provide a broader kind of education for what the options are.
Do you know how these detention facilities are regulated, oversight in terms of what's being done there at all?
So ICE has national detention standards. So there are certain requirements that each facility has to meet. They are periodically inspected. I think the Government Accountability Office of the federal government does periodically do inspections to make sure that are to identify whether ICE is in compliance. There are all sorts of minimum standards that are frequently not met across detention facilities. Um, and it's more difficult now to kind of bring complaints. There used to be an office of civil rights in the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security is the large department, and then ICE is an agency underneath that department. So DHS has authority over ICE, and there's no longer a civil rights office. So the place where people would previously complain and that would investigate complaints around civil rights abuses is no longer there. And so it's more difficult for people who are experiencing some of the really horrific conditions in some of these facilities to have their concerns addressed.
Yeah. Speaking to that, and if it's okay, if you can't answer this, but this is something I've been curious about because we heard a lot. You hear when this issue is talked about on a grand scale, and we've heard, administrations struggle to get immigration right, struggle to make sure the border is secure, as they say, but also things are going okay when it comes to the process, and that it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, what have you. But you hear a lot about how, well, there were more people deported under the Obama administration, for example, or the example of, but then you hear the polling of people saying, well, the majority of people don't like how this is being conducted with ICE and the mask and everything like that. But then they say, well, what about the kids in cages with Obama and how that all looked? Is there anything you can speak to and can you compare the way it's been conducted when it comes to border crossings at all, and maybe provide some clarity in what that meant, and even the kids in cages thing?
I think in terms of different administrations proceed in kind of different ways with different priorities, right? I think one of the things that has marked the more recent Democratic administration's approach is to um, increase access or attempt to increase access to lawful pathways. So that was one of the Biden administration's kind of primary attempts, was to identify how they could regularize people entering the United States, such that um, it would allow people access the to the regularity and predictability of the immigration system, without overburdening an already overburdened system. Both USCIS and the immigration courts are very, very, very backlogged, and things take a very long time to process. And so the more cases that get pulled into those systems, the more difficult it is for everyone. And so the Democratic administrations have really focused on more of the lawful pathways. The Trump administration has really focused on making it impossible to immigrate. And I think that that is in itself effective, in that it is not, this is not a country that is a safe or good place for people to immigrate to, because they are exposed to so much risk at the moment. And I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think that there are the issues and there are the policy concerns and considerations that don't always translate into what is more commonly understood in kind of some of the narratives that we see. And so I think that the things that catch attention, like kids in cages, which that is still happening. But family detention, family separation, things that really capture people's attention do tend to be the more unusual things, and the I guess the more mundane horrors of the system persist administration to administration.
Hmm. Finally, what is your, because I've had this come up even in my own interactions personally, what is your advice to someone that either someone in their community they see get taken, or a friend or family member, where they could go from, a place in Maine and then be taken down to Texas, and they don't know what to do next? What's your advice to someone in a community or a family member that's experiencing that right now?
If somebody needs, this is not legal advice, but the resources
Yeah.
that are available are limited, and it is difficult to track people down who are taken into ICE custody. There is the ICE detainee locator, which is on ICE's website. If you put it into Google, it's fairly easy to find. And if you have somebody's name and certain biographical information, you can try to find where they are, and they should be in there. There are data entry issues that don't always reflect the actual location or aren't up to date, but that is generally the best way. Locally, there are resources. The Capital Region Sanctuary Coalition has been very active, and they provide amazing support for people more broadly around arrests and detentions. And they are good people to they are providing a lot of support around on their on their various social media feeds. So that's a good resource as well.
I've heard also of issues with people that are looking for representation, but they're not in the same state anymore, right? And so that lawyer that they might know can't go and represent them elsewhere, right? That's probably part of this another challenge.
So because immigration is federal law, immigration attorneys, regardless of where somebody is, can represent them. Um, so I can represent a client who is maybe arrested and taken to a facility in Texas. But it is very difficult for me to access that facility. So each detention center has their own rules around access. They have different methods of making appointments with clients. And you have to work individually with each facility in order to arrange that access. I am familiar with how that happens in Batavia. I don't know how that happens in all of the facilities in the South. And so it's just much more difficult for agent attorney to access and work with their clients. There are also fewer attorneys. There are so many facilities, detention facilities in Louisiana and Texas primarily, but across the South. And there are simply nowhere near enough attorneys to represent people. And so it is um, it is just close to impossible to find someone to represent you, regardless of whether you are um, I think regardless of whether you are in New York or in Texas, but it is especially going to be impossible in Texas. There are also the Fifth Circuit has very anti-immigrant, unfriendly law, and so it is more difficult to litigate cases that are in the Fifth Circuit. So it's kind of like uh, it's kind of like venue shopping that the government is doing.
Lauren, as always, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.